Okay, welcome to the Sistah Girls Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Sharee, and today we have a very, very special guest with a new book that will require you to think and use your imagination. Shawntelle Madison is a best-selling author with books that span the romance and speculative fiction genres. Madison now is charting a new path with her latest book, The Fallen Fruit, a historical fiction that includes time travel, fantasy, and that centers on the Black family. Welcome, Shawntelle Madison. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Great news yesterday. Learned the Fallen Fruit hit the USA Today bestseller list.
Oh,
So it's thank
congratulations.
you. It's a good week. I'm very happy. Yes, USA Today bestseller.
Yes, see, look at that. We got some good juju going on because we was over here having a little nervous to break down in the key before, and you on the USA, like, girl, that's great. That like literally shifted my whole mood. That leads me to my first question. On a
Yes,
scale
please.
of 1 to your favorite song this summer, tell us the name of the song and how you're feeling. So the 10 would be like your favorite song, and then anything away from that would be, you would base it on that scale.
Yes, I would say for me, the song that's like playing and repeat in my head now is Megan the Stallion's Mamushi. And
Okay.
when she came out with that album, I was just mouth dropped because, like her, I'm also an anime fan. So to hear
Mhm.
all these references dropped in the album, to see how well she pulled it off, just absolutely loved it.
Mhm.
So, yes. And then what was your question about the scale again?
On a scale of 1 to 10, so like 10 it being like the your favorite and where the song is, you're rating it from that. So what do you feel like
Oh,
one
it's
to
a
10?
10 because it's an
I was
earworm
about to say
now.
happy to
Where
say it
yes,
now because
I'm just going down the street and then I just start hearing the lyrics like anywhere,
Mhm,
and then suddenly I'm that fangirl starting to do the dance challenge and
mhm.
everything. So yes, I'm that. I just it's a 10. I'm loving it.
I love it too. So we gotta start a little bit from the beginning. You have a BS in mathematics, a minor in computer science, and then an MFA in writing. How did you go from being a computer science girly to writing romance novels, speculative
Yes,
fiction,
yes.
and like
Mhm.
how do we get there to USA bestsellers? Like that's a pivot.
Yeah, that is a pivot, but honestly, I was that kid who had a
Mhm,
mom that was like, "You know what? Once a week, we gonna have a reading night." Thursday
mhm,
nights was no TV, no radio, no music. It was sit
mhm,
down and read, and so at that time, I've been a reader from the jump. I have been encouraged to read whatever I want, and of course, as a kid, I wrote really bad, like bad, fan fiction and stuff when I was a kid, but it wasn't until after college. So I knew that I was on the STEM track. I've
mhm,
always been on the STEM track, but to actually finish my first bachelor's and then go out into the workforce, then I started working as an independent contractor, working from home, doing web development, stuff like that. And then when my daughter was about 1 years old, I kind of met another mom at a play group. And that mom was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go back into writing. I heard that you write too. We want to exchange information and then do this professionally. So to actually have someone, be like, yes, you could do this as a hobby, you're enjoying it, but you can do it professionally was a huge pivot moment for me in going from something that was just kind of like a hobby to something like, okay, I'm gonna finish a book now. I love romance. I'm gonna write a paranormal romance, whatever I like. And then to have someone be like, okay, join professional organizations, work on the craft. And so after I did all that, then that's kind of like how I fell into writing professionally, was just surrounding myself by peers who were actually really thinking about the craft of writing, improving themselves, and then writing for publication. So that's actually how I started out.
that's amazing. So did you ever have a moment where you just like, hmm, maybe like how did you know when you were on the right path? Right? Because you're going through all these things and you have like a full out path already laid out with mathematics and science.
Yes.
How did you know? Because like in most families, girl, you a success. You're already winning. Who skirts and goes skirt, pivot, and like, all right, let's take a sharp left. That was like a sharp left. Like we gonna just get out of here. So how did you know? Because I'm sure people, when you tell the story, it sounds a little like, but why you? And a lot of people don't know that writing, you can make money and make a life for it. So as soon as you hear the art,
Yes.
you're struggling, something, something. And so, how did you even find the confidence to say, you know what, I believe in myself. I believe that if I learn and take the time out, then I can, achieve my goals.
I think it was that moment in time, that fall of 2008,
Mm-hmm.
where before I would dream about scenes, I would
Mm-hmm.
see scenes in my head of stories, so many plot ideas, but I
Mm-hmm.
never explored them. I never gave myself a chance to really see what I could do with them. And
Mm-hmm.
I will admit, part of that is I had young children at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
was also working from home as a developer. So at
Mm-hmm.
the time, it was more about focusing on other things versus this movie role that was always playing out in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So the point to where I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write down these things was actually a big moment. I kind of gave myself permission to be like, okay, you finished your undergraduate work. You now have these young children, you now have a job, you now have things that, you've worked toward. So for me, it was just that almost like a surrender in a way to where it's like, yes, I love this. And then once I made that switch, that spring in 2009, when I would sit down to write, I just couldn't not write anymore. It was kind of like opening up the floodgates. And
Mm-hmm.
when you hear writers say, I can't not write, there's always something in my head trying to come out.
Mm-hmm.
At that point for me, that had been dormant for years.
Wow.
And so to actually give myself that permission, even though at the time I was still working as a developer and making a lot more money as a developer than as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I feel like a lot of the times as women or anybody as writers, we need to give ourselves space and permission for that thing that we are passionate about
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like have it be that flower that just needs some water and just give it a chance to bloom. So that's how I kind of just had to give myself permission to follow that dream.
I love that. And I feel like that's going to inspire a lot of people, especially when you're like in a career and you're like, I just have that nagging feeling that I want to write. And I just,
Yes.
oh, it's, yeah, I got kids. I might have, like I said, a specific path and that everybody's proud of. And sometimes when people are rooting for you to win and you win in that thing, it's just like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. How do I not let people down? So I think your story is definitely going to inspire a bunch of writers to kind of,
Thank you.
to listen to that voice and keep going. So you are the pivot queen now that I think about it. So you've written in romance and speculative fiction for years, and you're a best
Years.
author. So this is not like you just said it's not new to me, but this is your debut, right? So you were doing a thing that was another once again. Now I'm starting to realize the pattern. You pivot when you feel like it, and you wanted to switch genres, and this is how we get the falling fruit. This is historical fiction. This is fantasy. This is
Yes.
oh my goodness, what is going on? Could this happen? So what made you switch genres and how what was the steps that you took to kind of like pivot out? Because again, people like when things are a success. You were a success
Yes.
genres.
For me, it was back in 2018, and I was kind of one of those people that I tend to be introspective. I mean, anytime, since I've been in tech for over 15 years now, tech changes like every 15 minutes, where I'm having to learn a new framework, a new programming language, a new process of actually doing my job more efficiently. And I kind of do the same thing in my writing, where I'm thinking to myself, okay, what are my strengths? What are the things that I'm really passionate about? Whether it's interrelationships, whether it is adding intention in a scene, what are the things I enjoy? And then what are the things that potentially my readers might like from me? And so back in 2018, I was sitting with one of my besties. She's a contemporary romance author named Jessica Scott. And Jessica and I were having that big discussion where we were like, what direction do we want to go in? Do we want to stay on the path that we're on? Or do we want to explore some new genres, explore some new things?
Mm-hmm.
And for me at the time, I was like, you know what? I'd love to tap into more women's fiction. I
Mhm.
would love to go a little bit outside of romance, a little bit outside of the speculative fiction like urban fantasy, paranormal romance, those types of things. And so at the time, I kind of inched toward women's fiction, but then after having some talks with some other peers of mine, Stephanie Dre, some other folks, I really wanted to see what I could do with historical fiction. And at the time, I had also been doing a lot of work in terms of genealogy for my family. And girl, there is
Well,
so
that
much,
makes sense. That
yes, there
literally, like,
is
when you said that,
so much tea.
well.
Yes, there is so much tea in exploring your family's genealogy. And so at that point, it was kind of like, where do I want to explore? Where do I want to go? Then having the genealogy come in with my family's histories and stories. And so that transition was basically just falling into things that I was already exploring. And
Mhm,
so it was easy. I would just say, though, the hard part, though, in the transition with historical fiction was the research aspect.
mhm,
Not that I wasn't doing research before, but to actually do something different than what I was before, where maybe I might have researched and spent like an hour or two, where when I was starting out with historical fiction, I was like spending like hours on topics like, girl, I spent 5 hours learning about makeup in the 1920s. It became a black hole. I lost time, didn't get any writing done. So, in switching gears, I kind of had to learn, okay, this is a new process.
mhm,
Okay, if I'm going to be tackling research, I need to be mindful about it. And so, yeah, it was definitely a jump in terms of the pivot,
mhm.
but in any process, whether it's tech or writing, you just have to figure it out. And then once you figure it out, just rinse and repeat over and over again.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna read the synopsis because
Please.
let me tell you, I this whole summer I was on a quest. I was like, this is the summer that I'm gonna read outside my regular genres. I'm gonna try something new. And I had a whole thing. I could not find a book that would hold my interest. I was just like, okay, this is it had either a lot of history
Mhm.
and it just didn't hold me. So it wasn't that the writers were writing bad or the storylines were poor. Um, I'm just stuck in my ways, but I couldn't find the book. And I was like, but I love sci-fi movies. I love fantasy movies. The movies, yes. Historical
Yes.
fiction on television, love it. But in the book, I don't know if I could, if I could sit, it'd be like, and because they speak how sometimes the characters speak in that time. But I read the synopsis and I said, wait, hold on. So I'm reading because I want the people to listen to this, and you're gonna do the same thing I did, run and purchase it. So, on a rainy day in May in 1964, history professor Cicely, is it Cicely?
Sicily. Mhm.
Bridge Davis begins to search for the 65 acres of land she inherited from her father's family. The quest leads her to uncover a dark secret. In every generation, one offspring from each Bridge family unit vanishes and is mysteriously whisked back in time. As soon as I heard that, I was like, wait, what? Rules have been established that must be followed to present dire consequences. Never interfere with past events. That's usually how it is. Always carry your free Negro papers. I stopped. I said, wait, you got a point. I said, wait, hold on. We
Yes.
about to back. Search for the survival family packets in the orchard and surrounding forest. The ribbon on the pack designates the decade the pack was made to orient you in time. Do not speak to strangers unless absolutely necessary. With only a family Bible and a map marked with the locations of mysterious containers to aid her, Cicely heads to the library, hoping to discover the truth of how this curse began and how it might be ended. As she moves through time, she encounters a circle of ancestors, including Sabrina Humbles, a free black woman who must find the courage to seize an opportunity or lose her heart. Luke Bridge, child, that's my Luke Bridge, who Travis's battlefield slavery and time himself to reunite with his family. Rebecca Bridge, a mother tested by ominous threat, and Amelia Bridge, a young woman burdened with survivor's guilt who will face the challenge of a lifetime and change Cicely's life forever. It's a race through time and against the clock to find the answers that will free her family forever. When I read that, I said, this is the winner. This is the how did you even come up with it? Because time travel, everybody does that. Everybody goes back to the past, back to the future, a wrinkle in time, all this other stuff. But usually people see it as something good. It's
Yes.
always something cool and fun. This book, it was a curse. And and it only could be a curse technically because of how you wrote it, right? And it was Black people. So what made you think, one, I'm gonna go historical fiction, I'm gonna add some time travel, I want this to be about Black people, and then from where you started it from, because that is very important. You didn't say we're gonna time travel back from 2023.
Yeah, that was one of the things is the story idea actually, it was all born within a day. The idea of the bridge, everything in a day, but as
Oh.
far as where the setting was, that was
Mhm.
actually based off of me doing my genealogy. So,
Okay.
what I discovered is my 6th great grandmother on my mother's side actually, she lived in the Charlottesville, Virginia area, and her name was Amy Bowles Farrow. And
Mhm.
Amy was a formerly enslaved woman who bought hundreds of acres of land in the Charlottesville area. And she's just amazing because she was surrounded by a lot of those major plantations and she made a life for herself and her children. And so, for me, in looking at Amy's life and wanting to examine it at first, but of course, since I write speculative fiction, I couldn't help but add a twist to it and think for my ancestors,
Mhm.
trying to come up with a life for themselves, what would their life have been like if they were actually cursed with time travel? And it was one of those lightning strike moments. And I
Mhm.
remember that day, May 21st, and
Mhm.
just being like, oh my gosh, what I could do with this. Now, at the time when I came up with the idea, I didn't have a lot of the secondary characters in place. And actually, the first person I actually wrote was Sabrina Humbles during the American Revolutionary era. But specifically for me, it was this family itself and their circumstances based off of my ancestors' land and me wanting to explore what was their life like. What was it like
Mhm.
for them in looking up the chain of my ancestors? What was each of their lives like in the Charlottesville, Virginia area as free Blacks leading up to
Mhm.
where I am today? So the opportunity to explore that
Mhm.
was amazing. But of course, adding in the time travel aspect, once I
Yeah.
did that, the world exploded in
Mhm.
terms of what was the beginning of like, I'll use air quotes, the beginning of the curse
Mhm.
all the way up to, and of course, I could have approached this from a contemporary space, but for me, I really wanted to have the story start at a particular time period where so much was going on, especially for African Americans in the 1960s
Mhm.
with the civil rights era, and to have a woman in that space
Mhm.
actually fall back in time and
Mhm.
have her examine her history and then also give her an opportunity to reflect on what she experienced, what she did in the 1960s, and then fall back in time. It was just too much fertile ground to
Mhm.
not really bring up a lot of the African American experience during that time. So there was so much that I wanted to tap into, and I chose the 60s on purpose due to there was so many amazing things to tap into.
Yeah, so I have a question about that. So, how
Please.
much how much research did you have to do for the story to make sense and not have time travel overshadow the plot? Because that could have easily happened because while Cicely is trying to beat time, other characters like Luke are being dropped back in time, right? So you could have spent a great deal on the time element versus how they were impacted because of time. So how did you make those decisions on when to focus on the time travel itself and that be like the headline or the Beyonce, and when to focus on the personal story so that we could like see them and humanize the characters and it's just not just like another time travel movie. Story, sorry. You know I'm
Yes.
about to make a movie for this book, but
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. The thing for me that over the 10 years of writing that I have to oftentimes I will have to consistently remind myself of is, as you said, the important thing for me is the relationships, it's
Mhm,
the characters. So sometimes I will have what I call, a squirrel moment where I kind of go off and I do my own thing.
mhm,
But then when I have my editors, my critique partners being like, I love this scene or this scene. There were actually scenes with Luke that I actually had to cut
mm,
because I there was so much that I learned during researching the American Revolutionary period, especially for a free Black man what it was like for him to enlist, what was his training like,
Yeah.
what was his life like leading up to that. I feel like I honestly could have wrote a whole book
Mhm.
on Luke's
Luke
experience.
alone, just by himself.
Yes, just a whole book on his experience. And so for me, during the writing process, there were moments where the plot tried to take over or where I tried to maybe have something exciting happen
Mhm.
just for the sake of, oh, this, let's bring in this fantastical time travel or this fantastical moment in time. But
Mhm.
then I would have to circle back and say, no, what are these characters feeling? What are these characters going through?
Mhm.
This is what I need to focus on. And
Yeah.
then the time travel aspect, it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
That thread of tension, it's
Mhm.
always going to be it's going to be that gorilla sitting in the room. So it's always going to be there. But then I need to circle back and actually zoom in on the camera on the people, on what they're going through,
Yeah.
and they're still going to get the time travel.
It's so good. So there was a trend on TikTok a while ago, where the question was asked, if you could live in any time period, what would it be? And white people specifically chose periods that were really far back because they had the privilege of not even considering how far back they had to go. They could go to whatever time they want to. So did time travel to specific decades make you reconsider in the beginning how far back you would go? Because we would have to include slavery. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You have to include slavery at some point. And did you teeter on like, well, if I go this far back, I'm gonna have to now go dive into that. You can't mention this without not mentioning that. Or even how you said my free Negro papers is like, how far back do we want to go? And how much do we want to actually focus on again what's happening versus the interpersonal connection? Because with Luke specifically, it was very hard to go back from where he came from to if he went back even a few years, he was going to be in trouble, right?
Yes, yes.
So how did you make the decision to where to start from when you were going back with like Luke? Not Cicely because she was already in the 60s. That was a little bit, but I'm talking about when you back then. It's just like I don't want this to become it's another slavery book.
Yeah. So the first thing that I was going to say is that before I wrote this book, I was like, oh, yeah, I want to see medieval Europe or I want to see such and such time period.
Hmm.
After I wrote this book, girl, I was like, no, no, I do not want to go back in time.
Hmm.
I changed. I was
Hmm.
like, you know what? What's actually important to me in terms of going back in time? What is something I missed or I enjoyed? And for me, I am so sad that
Hmm.
I never got to see Michael Jackson or Prince on tour. So if I could go back in time, I would go back in time to spring of 1992 to see Prince on the Diamonds and Pearls tour. I'd be that groupie going from European City to follow him around. So that's the first thing I'd do if I go back in time. I would experience the things that were actually important to me that I missed. So not necessarily going back to the 60s, the 40s, the 1910s. It was kind of hard reading about the Virginia slave codes
Yeah.
or Jim Crow laws or a lot of the things that affected African Americans over the years.
Hmm.
And so for me, like I said, I circled back to what was that thing that was of value to me that I would want to experience. Now, in terms of my characters and going back in time,
Hmm.
a lot of it was plot-based choices in terms of where they went back in time to.
Hmm.
So, a lot of the times when you see people going back in time, it's actually wasn't random. When
Hmm.
I choose a time frame, there's a purpose to them being placed in those particular times. I'd love to say, "Oh, I rolled a dice and
Hmm.
I had Luke go back 20 years." Actually, no, there was a purpose to him. Not going to give away any spoilers. Him going back to a particular place in time to
Hmm.
where the events that unfold, his experiences kind of shaped his perspective. And
Yeah.
then also he is tested in ways to where he is kind of like the catalyst for the family rules. So it was all strategic where people were placed, how far back they went, who went where. It was all strategic.
Now, of all the stories, because we have 5 point of views, Luke, I can't even talk about Luke without feeling some type of way. Luke and Sabrina sent me down a river with no paddle, no boat, just vibes. So their story was so beautiful, but it was so like, when I say sad, because we ran
Yes.
into Luke more than one time, and when I ran into him again, I was like, like, because in my mind, in my, I got that romance and just turned
Mhm.
on. I'm just like, oh yeah, it's gonna eventually like, and so uh what made you add the romance element to that story? Because you could definitely have told the story without their romance in it, but
Yes.
that definitely made it, turned it up 5,000 notches.
For me, actually, the first scenes, I still have the notebook where I wrote that opening line on paper.
Mhm,
Not the original one. It's been edited a couple times and massaged, but the first opening lines were actually from Sabrina's perspective. So Sabrina was actually the character that spoke to me first.
mhm,
The book, how it came out, is originally I started it out chronologically,
mhm,
but then later, the book was actually switched up, and you saw its current form where I kind of switched things up a bit in
mhm,
terms of the timeline. But in coming up with her story, um, as a romance author, I could just feel her yearning.
mhm,
That was actually one of the most initial things that kind of popped up in actually seeing her as a character. Was I did see her, I saw her little sister, I
mhm,
saw that she was kind of, adopted by the Bridge family,
mhm.
but then I was like, "Oh, there's something else here. There's something else going on. She's
Yeah.
in love with someone, and, through circumstances outside of her control, there's nothing she can do about it." And for me as a romance author, I just love that thing that kind of it's part of the human condition that's just so beautiful,
Mhm,
and that's the possibility of falling in love. And
mhm,
so for me, that was like a huge thread that kind of carried through where you had this woman that she wanted to be educated. She had hope for the future, but then she also had this little thing that was just kind of poking at her, and that was just the love that she felt for someone that she kind of accepted that couldn't be returned. So yeah, that for me was just I loved writing Sabrina and Luke's part was actually it's actually my favorite part of the book.
child, it nearly ended my whole life. I had to put I said, "Wait, hold up now. Let me," it's good when you gotta take it and sit it down and be like, "You know what? Give me a minute. I'll be right back." So the story is unpredictable in so many ways. Like every part that I thought I was going to predict, or how this happened, or who was connected to who for real, and who wasn't, and just secrets. And I'm just like, what? This is as the world turns in time travel, but that's usually how families are. You find out so many things. Because I have found out I remember I was a kid and they was like, oh yeah, because I'm like my cousin. And my grandma was like, that's not, that's not your real cousin, right? And it was like, yeah, yes, she is. It broke my whole heart. I'm like, wait, how? It's like your mama and her mama was best friends. Her mama and me were. That's how y'all became cousins. It's not a real thing. So my thing was you humanize each character though. So like when they were going through their things, they were going through it with their family, and the personal stories was so different, right? Because of age and the time that they were originally in. And as I read it more and more, I realized that time itself played a huge part, in even
Yes.
their hopes and their dreams.
Yes.
When writing this story, so when writing this story, did you notice that? So like for example, Amelia and Luke's ideas about college versus Cicely's ideas about college, even like where they are and what space, what was freedom to them in the time period. Because you have Cicely, the 60s, just signing the Civil Rights Act. You have Amelia, hers is just going to college and moving out of her small town. Like it's so interesting how time itself dictated their life. So I was just like, did you ever notice that while writing? And how did you feel about that during the process?
I would say that came out as the story was maturing.
Mhm.
The key is it almost feels like each individual part is almost like a novella. And it
Yeah.
was yeah, it was important for me as I dove into each part to make sure I truly knew the character. I
Mhm.
truly understood because as you were saying, time changes perspective, and
Mhm.
perspective was just pivotal in this story to
Mhm.
whether you, for example, say when Luke Bridge came back and from time travel, and that's not a spoiler, he is going to come
Mhm.
back, but
Mhm.
the perspective of his family in the American Revolutionary period and how
Mhm.
they interpret time travel is going to be so different from someone in the 1960s, like
Mhm.
Cicely, who has read science fiction books, who has seen
Mhm.
the time traveler, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, and as the story unfolded for each person, I had to make sure that I was really oriented in time, whether it's the 1920s or whether it's the 1814s for Reba and her family. I had to think to myself, what was their belief system?
Mhm.
Or if they didn't have a belief system, what were
Mhm.
the things that mattered to them? And then as the story kind of unfolded with the events of time travel, with time, how did things change from before? How did the
Mhm.
rules come into play? Were the
Yeah.
rules even there, or were
Mhm.
they about to come out? All
Mhm.
those things kind of had to be braided into the narrative and kind of married with that person's perspective when I'm in their head. So I'm
Mhm.
kind of spinning several plates and thinking about so many things. But of course, as I said before, I still have to circle back to the people and their relationships and how those relationships are going to affect things over time. So yeah, there's so much I had to kind of interweave in there.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Yeah, so I had the idea in 2021, and then I had written a couple chapters, gone back and forth with my agent, my critique partners, and then finally, I believe I went on submission spring. So at that point, the book hadn't been done. So
Mhm.
then it got to spring 2020, 2022. Then I sold the book. Then I finished writing it. And I will say, most of my books, back when I was a baby writer, they would take me about 6 months. But
Mhm.
now that I've written a lot longer, it's a lot more editing, it's a lot more chewing and thinking about the book. I would say I finished this book late 2023. Yeah, late 2023. So, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this book took me a little less than 2 years to write.
Wow.
But
I would.
a lot of that, yeah, a lot of that, I will be honest with you though, is that the summer of 2022, it was just, I couldn't not write. I remember
Mm.
sitting at the library at Lindenwood doing research and being so hungry to write these characters, to write these things. And I think to have that passion really
Mhm.
helps speed forward the process because it's like, I'm hungry to get these words in the page. I'm hungry for everybody to meet these people. So I will say some books have taken me longer, but this
Mhm.
book was shorter because I just had so much fun and I couldn't just resist getting the words on the page.
I don't know why I thought you were going to say like 5 years because it was so much, so detailed, so even down to the family tree. I found myself looking at that. I know people going to read them just like me. We had to flip back and be like, okay, now where was Earth? Technically, who is this cousin or brother? And I thought that was so, like, the writing was so good. Even how you describe things, or like I could vividly see that home, those houses, the land, new and old, when it was like in different time periods, the clothes. So you did an amazing job at just
Thank
painting that picture.
you.
Um, my another question I have, I was very interested because I did look at some reviews. They all were really good, but I felt like it was in my opinion, people were coming at it from different takes.
True.
And I think, in my opinion, it was because you have white readers and you have black readers, and they were literally pulling out very different things. So
Yes.
I think that white readers and black readers will have a very different experience when reading the book because of the history and the chain of events.
I will think, as I said earlier, it's all about perspective.
Hmm.
So for me to actually have my education in,
Hmm.
in Iowa and only learn the things that I learned about the
Hmm.
American Revolution, about the Civil Rights era. Now, of course, in college, I could have gone deeper on a lot of these topics,
Hmm.
but there was so much that I
Yeah.
never really got a chance to dive into.
Hmm.
So I will say that as a woman of color, if I was reading this for the first time, I mean, pardon my French, a couple times I would have been like, damn. And
Hmm.
I thought the same things that myself as I was reading these things, where I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm looking at these Virginia slave codes, or
Hmm.
I'm looking at how people who were formerly enslaved but then they became free. What were their lives like? Or what was it like to for a Black man who had done World War I, Samuel Ross, to come back and to not get respect and to um, do your service, but to be perceived as less than a man.
Mhm.
It was like a punch in the gut for
Mhm.
me to actually learn these things.
Mhm.
So I can imagine for other women of color, for even for Black women, they might, like me, feel some type of way when
Mhm.
they see some of these things that maybe they might have known,
Mhm.
or maybe they have now learning about it and they're really contemplating it.
Mhm.
Like, oh my gosh, I would love to time travel to the 1920s. I would love to, do the thing, the prohibition. But then I was hoping with this book to be like, no, there was so much more. If you fall back in time for real, it's not necessarily the celebratory thing. It is a thing of potentially of caution.
Mhm.
It's something to where you can enjoy maybe the tourism aspect, but also to be fearful, and that the things that our ancestors went through is something that should be remembered. Because
Mhm.
oftentimes history repeats itself. So it's good to recall, to go into those spaces and to really think about what we went through in the past.
Yeah, and I think that not only thinking about it, you kind of have to sit with it. Just
Yes.
a lot of those stories you have to really sit with, and you're just sitting there like, wow, even though this is about time travel and like the fan, like no, but that really happened. Like,
Yes.
how would you feel like if you woke up and you had to have like freedom papers and you had to show them, or you had to, I don't know, like Luke's story, I guess stuck out with me the most because I felt like he had a lot of hope, and at points he had no hope
Yes.
about even like not moving or not wanting to go places because it was just like it was a he just kind of knew what was gonna the end, right? It was like, what am I doing all this for? And this is the end. But then I thought about it as like a black person during that time. A lot of people, their hopes and their dreams were watered down. Like, who could you have been if this
Yes.
wasn't there? So when I thought about his story, I obviously the story is telling itself, but I really thought, like, dang, how like hope, like your hopes and dreams are
Yes.
watered down just because of the time period I was born in. That blew my mind away. Um, yeah, that was deep. It was because I was reading it and I was just like, I get you. It's like I can see how his sister was so gun ho. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to move away. But he's like,
Yes.
for what? We only gonna go back in time. Like, what is the point? And then I started to really think, like, if I was back in that time, you can't be all you can be. You can't do all you can do because what is the point? Like, how do you have hope in that space? But my next question is the
Mhm.
thing that I think saved everything was the family aspect of it. So you see this like it's almost like the bond of everything is the time travel is the curse, right? But
Yes.
the family plays a significant role. The land is like the setting ground for everything. But
Mhm.
the family, every generation is looking out for each other. Every
Yes.
they never met them. And I thought that was beautiful. They never met them. And even if they were like fearful and the stories were like tall tales or horrible tales, you get these instances where even they would say something like small, like, that's just a spirit trying to get home. Or, like it's something, it's still a reverence for that person.
Yes.
That was so beautiful. So how important was that for you to incorporate that family dynamic? Because they could have been a family but not connected, right? They could have
Yes.
just the ties to the land and the curse, but you made sure even having the packs, like somebody thought about me before I got here. And I was like, that's so beautiful. It was just like one of those almost like they thought, even if I were at my distress. Because it's this one scene. I'm not giving away the book, y'all, but it is was one scene where Ursula encounters Sicily.
Yes.
And I was like, that was the most beautiful because she didn't know her story yet at all. She didn't know if it was time travel, she didn't know anything, but it was the way she cared for her in that moment of distress when all that woman had were her tears. And it
Mhm.
was like, you can come in my house. You're safe here. Like no matter what you're going through. And she didn't ask her what she for a long time. She didn't ask anything. And I was just like, that was so beautifully written. Like the way you connected it and family, whether by blood or by not by blood. we were black. Like she understood blackness in that moment. She understood her tears in that moment. She understood her distress. And so I was just like, how did you do that? Like, what was, why did you make it that way in that aspect? I mean, I'm happy you did. What was
Yes.
that
For
process?
me, it's one of those things where if you think about a group during the time period post American Revolution, um, they are surrounded by plantations. They might have had some other farms with some other people of color on them,
Mhm,
but you get that sense of the importance of community, the
mhm.
importance of helping each. And this was before the curse was really coming into
Yeah,
play. And
people didn't
so,
know.
yeah, you have that sense of community as the base, the sense of no spoilers, people showing up, being like, should we take care of these people? Are they runaway slaves? Should we
Mhm,
take care of them? That type of thing. But then later on, as the curse really starts to kick in, you see people who are losing children. You
mhm,
see people who are losing family members. And
mhm,
so when you have that sense of loss into play, it also turns into what what do I have control over? I
mhm,
do not have control over the time travel, but
mhm,
I have control over making sure that if another parent
mhm,
loses their child, what can I do? I can leave out the packs. I
mhm,
can, if somebody shows up, when Amelia and her brother Isaiah were walking around,
mhm,
at that point, it's like, maybe we can find somebody. Maybe we can save someone. And so, even without the curse into play, I definitely wanted to have that sense of ownership
mhm,
over future generations.
mhm,
That sense of it's almost like, your elders saying, okay, you need to be careful when you walk into this neighborhood, or you need to be mindful when
mhm,
you talk to certain people in a certain way and be respectful, because they're going to look at the color of your skin and they're going to perceive you in a certain way. So it's kind of like the same thing where it's like the village protecting their own. And
mhm,
so as time drew on and people understood the curse more, it became that bridge responsibility to not only have the packs refresh, but also to be looking out, being like, okay, anytime you could see somebody pop up on the land. And if they pop up, they might be from the future. And it is your responsibility to, as a bridge,
mhm,
knowing what happens, to actually try to help. Because, of course, this person they're going to be disoriented. They're going to be in such a horrible state. What do you have the power to do? What
mhm.
control do you have during your time period? Well, you can feed that person. You can prepare them for the world, because in essence, they are kin. They are your family. And we protect the village. We protect our family.
I love that. I mean, I know it might not mean much for me, but this was a phenomenal
Oh,
book.
it means so
It
much.
really
Thank
was.
you. Thank you.
And my last question before we wrap, what do you want readers to take away from this story? Because there's so many things, so many takeaways, but what do you want them to really just walk away after they hit the end or they put the book down? What do you want them to sit with?
That's the thing is I think initially in the beginning, what the readers would get out of it is perhaps hope. Because in the beginning, of course, Cicely has hope for changing the way events unfold. You have characters who hope to improve their lives and do different things, leave their current circumstances. But I think by the end of the book, what I hope that readers will walk away from it is resilience. And one of the things that I had found in exploring Amy Bowles Farrow, exploring my ancestors around Charlottesville, how those ancestors were recruited by miners to become miners in Iowa. And they crossed the country, they started new lives. Um, what I want is then for people to see the resilience in these characters, that even though a lot of them faced adversity, came up to a point of absolute loss, they were survivors. They continued on. And you can see how that continues on, how you have Luke in the beginning, but in the end, you have Cicely, you have Amelia, and these folks are survivors. And even if the circumstances didn't turn out the way they wanted it to, they still made it, they still survived.
I love that. So I have a few it's called flash questions. And so you
Please.
just answer them. First answer that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Writing in the daytime or the night?
Daytime.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Reading off of a like e-device, a e-reader, or a hardback, paperback or hardback.
Ooh, that's hard. I love the smell of books. I love to have like a book in my purse.
Mhm.
Yes, paperback all the way.
Solving a math problem or coming up with a good plot.
Coming up with a good plot.
The show Insecure or the show Girlfriends?
Okay, why are you doing that to me? Because that's the thing is the minute you said it, you said each one. I saw scenes. Okay, girlfriends. That one's hard.
Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X?
Ooh, actually, Malcolm X.
Okay. Jay-Z or Nas?
Okay, this is gonna show Nas. That
Okay.
one's hard because they're both goats, and
Mhm.
so, girl, why are you doing this? Yeah, okay. I'm okay. I'm not gonna switch. Nas,
Okay.
Nas.
And the last question, who is Shawntelle Madison?
Um, I would definitely say that I am who I am is, I guess I would say multifaceted. I'm one of those people that I tend to have a lot of passions, a lot of things that I love to study. My personality is I'm a learner, so I love to learn new things. I love to explore, and so who I am is I would say is I am kind of like I love to explore the world. I love to try new things, and I love to kind of see what's over that next horizon, so I can kind of see the sunrise and really kind of be in awe of the world. So that's me.
I love that. And tell people where they can find you on the internet. And this is your time to promote everything.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people. I tend to be quiet, especially when I'm promoting. I'm a lot more loud, but I'm usually quiet when I'm kind of doing my developer work and all that kind of stuff. But you can find me. My website is shawntellmadison.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Shawntelle Madison. I am also on Facebook, Shawntelle Madison Author. And then once in a blue moon, I do remember to tweet on Twitter or on a Blue Sky or Thread. So you can kind of find me in a couple places.
All right. Thank you so much. And make sure
Thank
y'all go
you.
buy this book. I'm telling y'all,
Thank
I'm standing
you.
behind it. This was good. It made the summer list. I'm so thankful I got it. And this is it. This is it. And thank you so much for joining me. This was an
Thank
amazing
you.
conversation.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.